Hey, Vinnie, good to see you again. My name is Guy Courtin. I'm responsible for overall global alliances at Six River System. Six River System is a leading warehouse automation solution provider. The robots are absolutely a critical part of it, but we certainly view ourselves as much more than just the robots, as really a full wall-to-wall solution for your warehouse fulfillment needs. So, V, what I want to do is sort of start us out, and I think this is a really important quote from the standpoint of what we do and how we play the space. And this is really when I'll read it out loud very quickly. With a higher degree of flexibility, mobile robots are a plug-and-play solution requiring a smaller warehouse footprint than traditional conveyor systems. And I think this extends even beyond traditional conveyor systems, right? A lot of people, I think, know of a goods-to-person robot, basically from Kiva, which has now been acquired by Amazon. And a lot of what we see with those types of solutions is that it's in a way it's very disruptive for your warehouse because you're going to have to reconfigure your warehouse, you're going to have to reshape your warehouse, move inventory. It's also potentially much more expensive. What we're offering, what we're looking at is really more of a flexible solution, a solution that brings you a lot of the value from automation, but does it in a much more flexible and cost-effective way. So when we think about this space,
I've had a tour of a Amazon distribution center, and I know exactly what you mean. Uh,
yeah,
there are lanes that they don't want any humans to be anywhere near, and you're right. It's a lot of reconfiguration that you need to do, or custom
it,
build warehouses, really.
absolutely. And I think maybe if you have the time and the capital, then to be honest, it's a fantastic solution because it brings a lot of efficiency. But we know in today's world those are luxuries that most companies do not have. So some of the things that drive, the changes in the warehouse, I think this data can't comes from pre-COVID. So I want to make sure that I couch that in that discussion because I think there's certainly a change we're seeing because of COVID, and we'll get into that in a second. But I think one of the things that we saw pre-COVID and that still carry on today, but maybe have a bigger importance, if you will, in the changes. Omni-channel pressure, we know that obviously a lot more direct to consumer, a lot more pressure on how we fulfill. That talent skill shortage, it's actually lower on this scale, but it's interesting what we've seen during COVID, it's gone up. We're looking at obviously new supplier part locations, faster delivery times, transportation costs. Those have not gone away, those only continue. And when we're looking, this data shows, and I think which is really interesting, a lot of our customers say the same thing, right? When they look to expand, we're looking at things like greater volumes of items shipped, right? More turns, employees, things like that. But when we think about what's happening today, Vinny, is you and I and all the audience is making our day jobs harder as supply chain professionals. Why? Because as consumers, whether it's B2B or B2C, we're demanding so much more of our supply chains and of our companies within the supply chain. And guess what? Your warehouse is going to become more of an integral part of fulfilling those orders and to meet that demand. And as we said just now, doing so with what you already have without being able to expand or to really reconfigure a lot of what your physical location looks like.
Or repurpose buildings close to where the demand is, right? Rather.
Correct. And that's a great point, Vinny, too, because one of the things that we're seeing is this notion of micro fulfillment, right? And I've talked to a lot, and this is interesting. It's no surprise. We're seeing it a lot in the grocery space where people are saying, hey, let's get closer to the consumer. Let's fulfill in the neighborhoods where the demand is. We want to bring automation to that, but we don't want to put in heavy conveyors. We don't want to put things that are in the ground because guess what? That location we use to do the micro fulfillment, in 6 months in a year, maybe we're going to change location. Maybe we're going to expand it. Maybe we're going to take it out. Maybe we're going to put it somewhere else, right? We want to keep up with the demand based on where people are. And I think that's why this flexibility and automation is really key. So I think what's interesting is this is some data from Logistics IQ looking at sort of warehouse automation, 5 years from now. And what you see on the bottom is obviously MRO services. Hey, that's keeping the lights on. We get it. But the big one, I think, is that AGV and AMR side, right, which is the autonomous guided vehicles. And that's, I think, what's really fascinating is because what you can also see is that sortation systems, storage systems, all these conveyor systems, right, are much smaller in terms of the potential growth. Why? Because, again, those are fixed assets that I think most companies today, most warehouses today realize, if I have one or two massive DCs, then yeah, I'm going to invest in that. But I also understand the trend is moving more towards smaller, more nimble fulfillment centers. And oh, by the way, I want automation in there, but it can't be fixed automation because that takes away from the value of it being, small and nimble. And I think that's the interesting part that we focus on, is this opportunity of having that flexibility. We have some customers and we have a lot of 3PL customers who really gravitate towards this. So, customers like XPO and DHL, and what they always tell us is that the beauty of the flexibility of the system is, as you know, right, 3PLs are always chasing where they're going to help their customers. They want to be able to take that automation with them or expand it, right? They know that their investments have to be flexible. Why? Because they could have a warehouse that in the morning is fulfilling t-shirts and shorts and sneakers, and in the afternoon it's fulfilling cosmetics, right? For two different companies that they are working for and doing their fulfillment. So they need a system that can be flexible as well within the four walls of the warehouse. So for us, we really focus on four big challenges which bleed out of this. And I think those challenges are pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID will stay. They've changed in terms of importance, but I think the challenges are there. First is around labor. And I think one of the things we're seeing in the warehouse, now it's funny, we're talking about robotics, and a lot of people say, well, robotics is to replace labor. No, robotics is to enhance labor, right? It's to make your existing labor more efficient, more effective. What we found is that, labor issues have haunted fulfillment well before COVID. We see that in the warehouse space. We obviously, if we look outside of warehouse into other parts of fulfillment, we see it in transportation, right? I think there's something like a 60,000 truck shortage drivers predicted. So we're seeing across the board. So for us, it's really the ability to walk in and help our customers with their existing labor and make it that much more efficient. Productivity. As I mentioned earlier, some of those numbers, right? We're seeing people gain more and more pressure on being able to fulfill faster, more SKUs, more just in time, all these different variables that are coming in and putting pressure. So obviously productivity has to keep pace with that. Flexibility. I've already mentioned a couple of times, but we certainly see this as a huge challenge to warehouses and huge opportunity for solutions like ours, which is this need for flexibility. How can I ensure that the investment I make today is going to be relevant in a year, in 5 years, in 20 years, and be flexible to keep pace with where things are going? A lot of our customers, or a lot of people, I'm sure, a year ago today would have said, if we said we'd be in this pandemic and things would be locked down, they'd say, you're crazy. There's no way, right? But look how things have changed, right? And that need for flexibility is paramount. And leading to that also is this health and safety issue. So a lot of the customers that we've worked with, obviously in the warehouse, it is a very, dangerous place. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. There's heavy machinery moving around. There are pallets of goods. It is a much safer than it used to be, but it's certainly a dangerous environment. And also traditional moving, heavy carts and things of that nature, now you're putting strain on your labor, right? You and I know if we're pulling a 200, 300-pound cart for a full shift, it's going to be hard on our knees and our back and our arms and all that. So even before COVID, we saw a lot of importance where people were looking towards our solution to basically help alleviate some of that, take away some of the long walk for their FTE, reduce some of the heavy lifting. During COVID, what's been very interesting is now we're seeing that the importance of keeping labor separate, keeping labor safe distance apart is becoming even more important. We just signed a customer recently, and I can't name the name, but we just signed a customer recently who literally told us, we are buying your solution because you are keeping our employees safe for COVID. Now, it also helps them do their picking and all that. So, that's not just, but they said that importance of safety has jumped up to number one in their buying mentality. And all this, when you don't address it properly, it leads to what we see as warehouse inefficiencies, which guess what? Leads to bad fulfillment, which leads to unhappy customers. So it's really important when we look at this that warehouse is playing a much more vital role in that fulfillment side. On who is 6 River Systems, we just celebrated our 5th year anniversary this past summer. We were founded by a number of Kiva executives. So again, they brought in that mentality of the goods to person and wanted to change that. A big milestone for us is we joined the Shopify family end of last year. And one thing for people to understand, and people might say, oh, Amazon bought Kiva, and then people got air quotes here Kiva'd, right? Where if you had bought a Kiva system, all of a sudden Amazon sent you a letter and said, guess what? You're not getting it. Well, Toby, our CEO, or Shopify CEO, has made it very clear from everything from earnings calls to public explanations and really across the board that we as a business will continue to operate as a separate entity. We are part of Shopify, absolutely, and we're working with the Shopify fulfillment network. But from a solution standpoint, we are still operating as we have the past 5 years. We have customers across North America and Europe. We have about 50 sites under contract.
So do they bring you in all the site planning and so on then? The design of the layout and so on?
Yeah, so if it's a greenfield opportunity, absolutely. We certainly, if you look at our name again, it's Six River Systems. There's no word robot or robotics in it. So we really think of ourselves, and we are a full in the warehouse fulfillment solution. So part of that is absolutely that, Vinnie, is we work with a lot of customers ahead of time if they're trying to do greenfield sites to help them understand what the layout should look like, to help them understand potentially where inventory should be placed, how labor should work. And we also work with existing customers who have existing warehouses to, again, go in and do an assessment, understand what it looks like, what makes the most sense in terms of zones and pick paths and where items should be, because again, it is really a system. It's a system within a warehouse that we are there to help our customers with in terms of getting better fulfillment, getting better picking, getting better rates out. So absolutely, it's certainly more than just the robot, right? The robot executes the heavy labor, the work. The software and all that behind it is what is the intelligence that runs everything.
And is your focus mostly outbound logistics, or are you also doing much of reverse logistics?
It's a great question. So we are planning to do more reverse logistics. Some of our customers, a lot of our 3PLs are actually asking for that. It's absolutely a space that, I personally see is going to be a huge, the circular aspect of the circular notion of inventory and of retail is only going to get bigger. I did a research and I heard, and it wasn't me who found this number, but I'll quote it, is if you took all of the returns in a dollar wise in North America, if over a year, it would be the second biggest retailer after Walmart. And
yeah,
that's only growing.
A friend of mine has a UPS franchise store, and he expanded earlier this year. And he said almost entirely the expansion has been reverse logistics.
Yep. So there's absolutely, and I think the robots are interesting, right? Because the robots that we're going to talk about is about picking, but there's no reason why we can't also put back, right? We can't also go back and replan. And if we're taking in returns, maybe we can break that inventory down, put it back on the shelf in the warehouse, and have that inventory ready for dispatch again. So I think it's a really fascinating space for us to keep everybody keep an eye on. I think I think automation is going to play a big role in that. So I think it's absolutely something that we're seeing. So all of this in the end, yes, Chuck is our flagship product. So let's meet Chuck. Again, Chuck is, and this is a picture of Chuck, and I'll get in a little bit, that Chuck is very configurable, but as it says, configurable, collaborative mobile robot on the planet. And as you can see, it's got, and we'll get more into this, it's ergonomical. It can carry up to about 200 pounds. I'm sorry, Vinnie, go ahead.
Explain the genesis of Chuck, the name.
Yes. Good question, Vinnie. And I, it's funny, I've been here for a year now. I kind of always take it for granted. But so our name is Six River. Six River, why? Because there are 6 rivers that flow into the Charles River. We're based here in Waltham, Massachusetts, we're outside of Boston. And Chuck is named after the Charles River. So Chuck.
Okay. Makes sense.
So if people spend more time with us, you'll see that we have a lot of water references.
And so it follows a similar Kiva model with a bunch of sensors along the tracks. A lot of the guidance is through QR codes on the floor and so on.
So Yeah, yes and no. So there is, and I'll send this video after Vinny with the sounds if you can't hear it. There is LiDAR and 3D cameras on the truck. That is for collision avoidance. The way the truck navigates the warehouse is that our team goes in before we install or before we put the system in, and we will map out the warehouse, and then we'll upload the map into the cloud, and then each truck that's on site will download that map, and it will navigate the warehouse based on the map that we laid out. It does have some QR codes around that we'll place strategically because, truck sometimes gets lost, and you can literally just bring it up to a QR code. It'll read it and it'll say, oh, okay, I know I'm in aisle 7, zone 3 by bin 2, and I know where I am. Boom, and off it goes. So from that standpoint, the truck is also very independent of the system once it's working. So what I mean by that is because it's not relying on pinging a server or the Wi-Fi network on a constant basis or pinging each other. If your power goes out, if your Wi-Fi goes down, once the truck has been inducted and is off working, it will keep working until its task is done or until the battery runs out, and then it'll go recharge itself. But from that standpoint, the truck is very, our system is very independent from your warehouse infrastructure. So what I mean by that is all we rely upon is the Wi-Fi network at induct. What I mean by that, and as I'll show you in a second, is that when we're inducting the truck, we are taking the southbound message from the WMS or the system of record. We are then looking at all the orders that you send us. We are going to compile them in such a way that makes the most sense based on pick density, where inventory is, where orders are coming, things of that nature. We're going to then feed those orders to the individual robot, which will then go out into the warehouse and start doing its job. But imagine now if you sent out your fleet of trucks and it's picking and the power goes out for 5 minutes. It doesn't matter. Truck has its marching orders. It's going to go off and do its work until those orders are done. So I think that's the important part to remember, because there's some other robots that are going to have IoT enabled. They're going to have Bluetooth. They're going to be communicating with one another. We've avoided that because in our thinking was always, hey, we want to be as independent from the warehouse system as possible.
Okay.
So some of the things, again, we eliminate the long walk. I mentioned that earlier, that it's really about the health and safety and efficiency standpoint, reduce the in-aisle walking, and speed up the task, right? At the end of the day, it's about how do we get more picks, more inventory out, more density of picks than other systems. So I just talked about this.
You mentioned you use third-party WMS systems. You're not offering that as part of your solution.
Great question, Vinnie. Yes, we are certainly not a WMS solution. We are WMS agnostic. So we work with a number of, all the traditional big boy WMS players. So Corber, Manhattan, Blue Yonder, Infor, Oracle, right? Excuse me. We have installs with all of them. We also have a number of companies that have homegrown WMS. Right. So we are completely agnostic. All we need again,
in that sense, very different than Amazon, right? Because they have chaotic storage, it's all stored in the AWS memory and so on. So you're dependent on the third-party WMS.
We are dependent on the third-party WMS to send us the orders. So this is a great part to talk about this. So as I mentioned, the number one part here at induct, that's where we would interact with the WMS. The WMS is going to send us a batch of orders that we in our system will then figure out which orders to cluster, right? Because we're not gonna just take in sequence and say, hey, Vinnie and Guy order these things, let's just pick them this way. No, because maybe Vinnie's order is spread out across multiple areas of the warehouse, and Guy's order is consolidated in one area, and maybe the third order comes in and it is spread out as well. And what we're doing when we take in those orders from the WMS is we're trying to figure out, hey, maybe I'm sending the truck down aisle 1 to pick these 2 items, and for Guy's order, and oh, by the way, Vinnie has ordered the same stuff as well. So why would I send a truck back down that aisle in 20 minutes? Let me just make 2 picks for both orders. Let me also look and see.
Who owns the SKU location information?
That is at the WMS. So we are not the system of record of the SKU location, we are dependent on the WMS to tell us that. We also are looking for ourselves, for our systems. We're looking and say, hey, maybe there's, for some reason, there's 25 calls for this one item in this aisle. Let's spread that out a bit so we don't get any congestion in the aisle, right? So all of a sudden we try to make it so that, again, we're not sending too many pickers, too many bots in the same aisle for the same item, because it's going to create congestion, and let's avoid that. So let's spread the orders out in a certain way. So it's really all about,
see certain items that are in high demand. Are people using that to relocate items so there's less movement? Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. So we're looking at that, constantly. So, one of the things that's really interesting about the bot is it's a massive consumer of data. It's also a massive creator of data. So to your point, Vinny, right? It's going to look and say, oh goodness, like, this and the heat map, this section is really burning up. Why? Because, hey, maybe your marketing department launched a BOGO at 1 o'clock in the afternoon online, and everybody just hit the site and is placing the order. We need to monitor that, and we need to make the decision at times too to say, just because you had the promotion and everybody's going down an aisle, maybe we can spread out the orders, because guess what? We're not going to ship them all out right away. We're going to ship them out over the day. So let's spread out the time that we spend in that aisle so that we reduce congestion. But that's where we're relying a lot on the WMS when we get that southbound message, to understand exactly, where's the inventory, where are the orders, all that stuff. And then we'll process it and figure out how to best run the chuck within those parameters within the warehouse. So one thing to be clear too is that, unlike some other solutions out there, our robot isn't just sort of wandering around the aisles waiting for a picker to come. Our robot goes to a meeting spot. A picker from that zone will meet the robot there. They'll scan in. The robot will say, hey, Vinny, let's go. Then you will follow the robot through your picks. So it's a guided workflow. The robot's interface is very user-friendly, touchscreen based. There are lights on the robot which allow you to do put to light. And you literally walk behind the robot and it will tell you, hey, Vinny, you're picking 5 watering cans. They're going to be on the left side. It's going to stop, obviously, in front of the water cans. There'll be an arrow. They'll point to it. You'll see the visual. You'll take the water cans. You'll scan them in. And then it'll even tell you, all right, these 5 water cans go in the bottom right tote. And that bottom right tote will be lit up on the side. So it's a put to light. You put the stuff away. You hit complete and you move on. And you do this through your picks. So our philosophy is, when you, as a picker, are tethered to the robot, you are working, which means you are picking, right? Or putting away. We do some interleaving, so you could also be replenishing some of the bins, but you are working. When you are untethered from the robot, you go back to another robot to continue your work. That robot now is traveling autonomously to a number of places, right? It can either go to another zone in the warehouse. Why? Because there's 6 orders that are from items all over the warehouse. So that robot would do the traveling. You as the picker stay in your zone. It could be going to pack out, which means, hey, these orders are complete. Or if, for example, in that case, you went to pick 5 watering cans and there were only 3 in that bin, you pick the 3, you scan in, you say there's an exception. Now that truck is going to go to a different area, the hospital, and say, hey, in this bin, this order is short. So figure out how to replenish it. And oh, by the way, bring more inventory back to that section of the warehouse to replan that. And then at pack out, that's when we recommunicate back to WMS and we say, hey, orders are complete. These are fine. These are short. These are ready to go. And we have that constant, those 2 points of communication with the WMS to keep that system of record updated with what's happening on the warehouse floor. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Great. So again, this is, and you can imagine this across a large warehouse. And one of the things I didn't mention is, one of the ways people acquire the system, right? You can buy it, do a CapEx, you can rent it, or you can do a hybrid. And a lot of times what we're seeing is the retail players, and you can imagine this, is, retail CPG obviously deal with seasonality, deal with peak season, which we're in the midst of. So for us, like a big client of ours, Crate and Barrel, right? What they do is they own a number of trucks that they have running in their warehouse, year round. Then during peak season, they rent some capacity to basically meet their needs for peak. And what I mentioned, how the truck sees, how it navigates. So what, from the rental perspective, what happens is we literally ship the trucks, you uncrate them, you hit the on button, it connects to the Wi-Fi, it downloads the map of the warehouse, and it's off and running, right? It gets in your queue, it starts an induct, and off it goes. It's taking that message, and it doesn't need any other configuration. It just runs, right? It just needs, and then when you're done with your rental period or you're done with your peak season, you just turn it off, you put it back in the crate, you close it up, and you ship it back to us, and that's it, right? So it's this ability to have that flexibility of scaling up and scaling down the capacity or the needs of automation, which if you had a conveyor system or some other system, you just don't have it, right? That's the part that we really think is important, is that flexibility, the ability to add capacity, the ability also to move robots around. So for example, if you're a 3PL and you have 2 warehouses, maybe you're going to have a fleet of truck in one warehouse, and then you say, you know what, for the next 3 months, I want this other warehouse. Easy to do. Now, we'd have to map out both, of course, but assuming that's been done, you can move your fleet back and forth, because you might know that, hey, we're coming up to Mother's Day and we're going to have a ton of perfumes being picked, so let's put more trucks in here. And then it's back to school, and this other is going to be picking pencils and notebooks, so let's move more trucks in there. So it's that ability to flex the automation across your network, which is also important.
Great.
So let's just take a look real quick at the truck. This is, again, I mentioned the user interface. Again, this is the screen that you see when you're using the robot. As it says here, your associate will be picking efficiently and accurately in 15 minutes or less. I can attest to this, Vinnie. When I started at Six River, and you know me, I'm not a warehouse guy. They had me in there, and they had me behind the truck, and within about 10 minutes, I knew what I was doing. I don't know if I was a good picker, but I knew what I was doing, and I was able to use the system. So, and I mentioned the temp labor, which is important for a lot of our customers that have that seasonality issue. What's great about this too is that your temp labor comes in, literally their first shift, they're working. And literally within the first 10, 15 minutes of their first shift, they're working, right? They're not learning some crazy system. They're not learning some kind of, rules and things like that. They're picking. And we have heard from some of our customers, which is really interesting, is that some of their temp labor actually comes back season after season. Why? Because they say, hey, this is a great system. It's easy to learn. I've learned it. It's easy to use. Oh, by the way, it's kind of cool. It's a robot. It's got this touch screen, right? We like to work here. It's fun. Fun may be the wrong term, but it's exciting. It's new to configure. As you see on the bottom, the payload is 200 pounds, configurable to 6 levels. So again, this tells you very quickly, sort of where our sweet spot is in terms of industries, right? Retail, e-commerce, life sciences. We do some B2B. We actually work with, a large aerospace company out of the Northwest corridor. You could figure out who it is, but they are using our system to pick items for their manufacturing facility. Now, we're not picking like turbines and things like that. We're picking nuts and bolts and wires and screws.
Yep.
So, we certainly apply across a lot of different industries, but the 200-pound freight can tell you that, I've had a lot of conversations with some interesting folks in the furniture business, and they're like, this is great, we'd love to have it. And I'm like, well, what are you picking? Like, well, we're picking refrigerators. I'm like, yeah, it's not going to work. Like, you're going to crush a robot. That's, that's not our sweet spot. But what's interesting and what I want people to realize, which I think is also, I mentioned earlier, the flexibility aspect. Now, these are the physical configuration of the truck. So obviously, if when you start, you can configure it as you see fit. But each time the truck goes through induct, it can be reconfigured in terms of what the totes are, what the boxes are that you put on it. So for example, we work with a company called Legend Valves out of Michigan, which does, pipe fitting, valves, as the name says, right? So it's a B2B. They sell to developers and such, who are building houses. So, and we work with our partner Pack Size, who does customized boxes. So what's very interesting is that at the induct, the orders come down, Pack Size, and we look at it. We determine what the order configuration will be on each truck. Pack Size builds the custom boxes, because these boxes are going to go direct to the consumer. consumer being contractors and such. So they build the customized boxes, and then we put them on the chuck. So you can imagine, Vinny, each time we go through, right, you might have 4 big boxes on the chuck for one time. The next time you might have 1 big box on the bottom and 7 smaller boxes on top, right? And that's the beauty of the system, is that it's each time it's entirely configurable. And what's great about that use case is that we build the boxes with pack size, put them on the chuck. We go through, as I showed you in the last few slides, we go through our picks. You pick your items, and then we also have a mobile printer on the chuck, which will print a shipping label each time that order is done. And then at takeoff, all you have to do is take the boxes off, inspect, slap the shipping label on, and off it goes. But each time that chuck goes through Induct, it could have a completely different configuration of boxes on it based on the orders coming in, right? And that's, again, that flexibility aspect that we bring with the automated solution. So let's talk a little bit about the data aspect. And I think that's something, as I mentioned earlier, right? We're a big consumer of data, but we're also a big creator of data. Sure. And I think what we do is we're constantly looking through the data about our zones, right? And what are the zones? The zones are basically, as we talked about, we pre-configure those when we start, because we determine, where the zones are, but we also understand even within a day or a shift, those zones might change based on the order profile coming in. So we're trying to always be conscious of that and allow the system itself to figure out what are the best zones, where do pickers need to be, right? How do we adjust based on SKU commonality, order priorities, congestion, right? So we're constantly looking at that. Now, this is in our system, right? We're not relying on the WMS to do this, but we're going to do it from our standpoint, because from the picking zone standpoint, we're going to ingest that data, but we're going to look at obviously the WMS data, and we're going to look at what's happening on the floor and figure out how do those zones need to be configured on an ongoing dynamic basis. And then I talked more about insights, right? We're providing a tremendous amount of insights for the floor supervisor. So this is giving a lot of details of what's happening in terms of their labor, in terms of the rates, in terms of the velocity, the speed, the efficiency. This is definitely something where some of our customers are talking about. They're able to look at their labor itself and understand better, which labor is better, which labor is not doing as well, which needs to be trained up, right? So this constant usage of data.
Now, WMS doesn't have much visibility to all the data you're capturing, right? Okay.
This is our data that we're, bubbling up through Tableau and giving it back to our customers from that standpoint. Oh, this is interesting because again, a year ago, this was not part of our discussion, but this absolutely has become, from using the data also to understand, again, how to keep labor safe, socially distant in the warehouse. I don't know if this will continue. I mean, let's hope that at some point we get out of this pandemic. But I certainly think that this notion of safety has come up. And I'll give you an interesting anecdote. Vinny, we talked to a prospect before the pandemic, and their HR department kind of put the brakes on our solution. Why? Because to them, it was a threat to labor. And I get it. At the surface, it seems that way. We certainly don't see it that way. We see it as an enhancement to the labor. Fast forward to the pandemic, that same customer or the same prospect's HR department again, now they called us directly and said, oh, by the way, can you keep my labor safe? Let's talk again, right? So it's certainly a shift that we're seeing, which is part of our time. So to wrap this up again, as I mentioned beginning, right? Labor, productivity, flexibility, health, and safety.
You got a use case for the NHL, for the NFL. Their players are wearing little watches, which are keeping distancing. Got a distancing sensor. You can sell them this.
We could. But it's funny because I talked to a warehouse manufacturer of that exact stuff, and we haven't gotten there yet. But I think we've talked about if two chucks get too close and know that there's two pickers, it could say back off, right? Like you're too close, like step back, or you're in front of this person for more than 30 seconds, time to move on, right? So absolutely, there's some aspects of that I think we've certainly kicked around inside, because there's no reason why I couldn't do it, right? There absolutely isn't. So to us, it's really, we hit these these four areas. I think it's, and again, I think it's important for people to remember, you know, it is Six River Systems. We are really looking, and as you mentioned, it's the robot is a part of it. Absolutely. It's a key part of the solution, but it's really the solution around it that is what we are, you know, the most excited about. Why? Because it's about the software, the data, the intelligence. The robot's going to execute on it. The software is going to determine that work, and that you know, how we execute on it will then be handed over to the robot. So it's a really interesting combination, because I think one of the things, you know, that I see in the space, Vinny, is that people get very enamored by the robot. Why? Because I can see it, right? Software, as you and I know, hard to see, right? I can see a demo and all that, but a robot, man, I can see it moving. I can see if it's a robotic arm, or if it's a shuttle system, or if it's moving pallets. Like, whoa, that's really cool. It's a robot. I get it. I love, you know, seeing the robot. What people need to remember is that robot is just plastic and steel and, you know, glass. It does nothing if it doesn't have the software behind it to tell it what to do in an intelligent way. Because otherwise, we're just, you know, putting mechanical products in the warehouse to look sexy. And I think that's the key as well. In our mentality, is that it really is that full system of the software and the hardware, being the robot, together.
This is fantastic, Guy.
Thanks, Vinny.